Hello, everyone in construction land. This is Eddie Thompson with Brown Edwards, and this is another episode of Construct-ive Conversations. Today, we have a special guest, Tina McPhail with Prey Construction. She is the Executive Vice President and CFO, and she is very active in the construction community. Today, she's going to talk about construction delivery methods and hopefully some potential legislation that will help improve some situational public jobs. So, Tina, it's very nice to have you today.
Thank you, Eddie, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. We had the pleasure yesterday, a group of us from Brown Edwards, to listen to Tina speak at the University of Charleston's MBA Speaker Series, and she gave a great presentation on this topic. And it's a really good subject matter for contractors, especially general contractors, and I can't wait for everybody to hear all of this. But first of all, Tina, I want you to please give our audience a little bit of background on yourself.
Okay. So I have been in what I call AEC, architecture, engineering, and construction, the industry for a few decades now. But I actually am an accountant by trade. I actually started my career at Ernst & Young, and back then it was the Big Six, before the consolidation in that industry. And I quickly realized, as soon as I got the CPA exam behind me at Ernst & Young and started really developing my career, I just quickly realized that life was not going to be enough for me. I was in love with the books. I was in love with everybody's books that I audited. And I quickly realized that it just wasn't going to be enough for me, that I needed to hop out into industry and just really take a deeper dive into the books and see all of the story, the whole story about the organization come to life in the books. And so I found my way into an engineering firm at that point in time and was there for quite a number of years. And then, as you know, what happens to folks in careers, they kind of rise up through the organization, and then sometimes they find themselves not doing what it is that they loved anymore, right? You end up with a position of supervision, or maybe, something else that you're good at. And so an opportunity came along to come to Prey to replace their long-term CFO who was retiring. And I thought, well, I've been doing architecture and engineering for a long time from the admin, accounting, administrative position. I thought I'll give this a try. I think I'll like this, and I think it'll be a chance to get into more of the grassroots operation of how infrastructure gets built and understand that story from the financial statement. So I have been at Prey a decade now. And I believe it might be my opus. It certainly will be the end of my career. I plan to retire here, but I am very much enjoying the work product that comes out of accounting and legal and IT and community knowledge that comes from just the construction industry. It's a pretty exciting time, actually, to be in the construction industry with a lot of challenges coming about with economics and AI, just a lot of frontiers to be in, and having a nice background in AEC. I think it'll be challenging and fun.
Today, it sounds like you had a similar career path as myself, except for I found myself back in public accounting. But I did spend some time in private and enjoyed that aspect of being in the trenches and being a part of building something. And one part of that is I won't say I'm necessarily in love with auditing, but I do enjoy helping clients and on the consulting side, or also with helping to build a financial statement that's dynamic for their bonding and banking needs. But
Yes.
yeah, I do agree with you. It's really good and satisfying to be a part of something that builds and grows, and you can actually get down and dirty in the trenches. with the company itself.
Yeah, I think I said yesterday, and I meant it. Like when I first came to Pray, we had a ribbon cutting for a client that we had built a very nice. They were a not-for-profit client, which is a big sector of Praise, big building sector of Praise. And I had the pleasure of being at the ribbon cutting, and he said in his speech that he wanted to specifically thank Pray because it gave him the infrastructure to better serve his mission in the world. And it really, it gave me chills. I immediately got out my phone and wrote that down because I just wanted to make that part of my thinking and my affirmation. So it is what we do. It's what I think we do, which is not just deliver some bricks and some mortar and some newness and some fresh, repairs and maintenance or whatever. What we do is find a way to better allow the person, the entity deliver their mission, whether that be your cancer treatment or you're educating a child or the place to worship or a place to have a beer on a Friday night, right? So I think that piece of it really speaks to me. Just the enhancing of a civil society, and allowing people to be able to blossom in that. It's really rewarding. I mean, I'm not in healthcare. I'm never going to save a life, right? But you can participate in kind of the moving or the evolving or the moving forward of mankind and how they use their space and how you free up their minds, their workflow to be able to be creative, to be able to solve the problems. It's meaningful. It gives meaning to me.
Yeah, that part really struck a chord with me yesterday whenever you mentioned that, and I never really thought about it in that aspect. You always think about when a contractor's performing work that they're just, like you said, building brick and mortar buildings and this is the product, but it's not just a product. Like you said, it's the infrastructure for that contract owner to deliver their mission. And I never really thought about it that deep until you mentioned that yesterday, but I mean, that's 100% true.
Yeah, it's the deliverable. And speaking of that, there are a lot of ways to deliver that deliverable to the client. And sometimes it's not just that building, it's the process. You're helping them through the process of that. They're changing their processes, they're changing their financing, they're changing their funding. They're changing their budget. And if they change their budget, they may change their deliverables. So getting there and being part of that process is super rewarding and hopefully equally rewarding for the clients. I think that was the epiphany from that speech. I was taken aback by how grateful somebody was for the participation in making maybe their life easier to do what they did, and maybe making that an advancement on what they had intended. And so I think that's what we at Pray try to do. We try to sit down and really listen. What is the deliverable that you're really trying to achieve here? What is what is your mission? Let us help you try to figure that out. And then in the process, we can figure it out how we behave toward that end, and what kind of contract we get in together so that you get what you want for what you paid for. And then at the end, everybody should be happier and better positioned.
Today, you mentioned yesterday that there were a lot of different ways to deliver that contract, to deliver that project. Can you describe some of the ways? I mean, there's T&M, there's lump sum, there's a bunch of different things, but you went into more detail yesterday on the specifics of what we're actually talking about today and how things can become better in that aspect too.
Right. So that is, I think, a general lack of knowledge out there in the marketplace. I think the construction world, now we're commercial contractors. So, we don't do the residential, and it's almost kind of like this separate little industry. And we don't do the heavy industrial, like heavy highways. So we're squarely somewhere in the middle there where we build infrastructure for largely private practices who, have something to do with their building, a medical practice, a church, something like that. And there are many, I think sometimes there comes a level of distrust with contracting, right? Because like any field out there, there's a time where somebody's been cheated, and there's a time where somebody has acted disreputably. And so, there comes from maybe even the residential market where I think that's probably a little more prevalent, where it's, oh my gosh, if you don't get 3 bids and take the lowest one, you're going to get hosed. You're going to get taken. You're going to get taken to the bank. And so I think we in the construction industry have been fighting what I think is just misinformation or distrust, maybe honestly attained, but maybe a disinformation there. We've been fighting that in trying to get these other alternative methods out there to produce your product for you and really maybe take that product and that deliverable and really give something way more back to it. So if we can kind of move beyond that distrust and move into some of these other methods other than just the get 3 bids and take the very lowest one, I think that people end up getting more suited and they get more value. They get a better deal. It's the difference between just a good price and a good deal. And so I think there's some work for us in the industry to build the trust, to build the knowledge, to have the legislative ability to choose different methods depending on what the need is out there for the client, whether that client be a municipality or a private doctor's office. So there are a lot of different avenues that we can go down to explore what it is that we want together. And if there's a modicum of trust and a modicum of knowledge, I think we'll do a better job for each other.
Right. You had talked about the design bid build, the low bid. Today, right now being the only method available under law for public jobs.
Yes. In West Virginia, right.
In West Virginia, but not the surrounding states.
That's correct. So that's a great place to start. So right now, design bid build, it's commonly called hard bid or low bid, is the only method that is available for public works. Now, you can do whatever you want in the private sector. You can enter into any kind of contract, obviously a legal contract, but any the other methods, and we can talk about those methods. But in the public arena, the design bid build and low bid is the only method that is available to contracting. And so think schools and even highways and judicial centers, jails, courthouses, public theaters, things like that. You must go through the public procurement process. So, for example, designs are all flawed. And I know there might be an architect listening to this, and I hope that they're big enough to admit it, but designs are all flawed because they are done in a vacuum. They are done creatively on a piece of paper. And so when the rubber meets the road, you've got to get down to how you actually build the building as drawn, right? That's why we have as-built. That's why we have as-built drawings. Nothing's ever built to the original drawings, right? So it creates an opportunity for that contractor who is low bidding to say, okay, I know this can't be built this way. But I am going to build it exactly as it is drawn. And I'm not going to add any other factor as to how it can really be built because I won't win. The only thing, I don't have to care about the owner at this point. I don't have to care about the building or the deliverable. The only thing I have to care about is how to win against the next guy. And if I happen to know that entity and know how they bid, well, I know how to do that, right? And so it takes the owner completely out of the equation. Now you are, for a commercial building, you may be a year downstream. And now you have a low bidder and you come out and you say, this building is going to cost $15 million. And the owner was like, my budget is 10. How is that going to work? Well, oftentimes in public works, it doesn't. Then it's a no-go. And everybody has spent their time and that nobody has a deliverable. And the contractors are mad because they have $10,000 in bidding and procurement costs. And we're back to the drawing board. And then what often happens in public works is they go back and say, well, we'll just downgrade this project into a small renovation, right? And then they overpay for the small renovation because now everybody knows their budget, right? And so it's just a process that works 10% of the time. but in today's day and age needs a better procurement method for everybody to get some, and that is a consecutive process. There are way better ways to do this concurrently and to have this collaborative information as you go along, so that when you end up at the end of the road, you're going to have a schedule compression because all of this stuff is taking place concurrently. And you're going to have the design that you can afford with the very attributes that you want most, and nothing that you don't want, right? And so there's a better way. We're just not allowed to do it in public works in this state. West Virginia needs to catch up to its surrounding states who have put better procurement laws on the books for this very reason, and to be able to afford more. The example we used yesterday was the flood. The flood here, the Nicholas County flood, hurt everybody's feelings in this office. It was like a zombie town around here because we were just, we were devastated at our neighbors devastation, right? And when it came out of there, and it still hurts me to know this today, that was such a mess because those bids came in at 40% more money than we had to build the schools from FEMA, right? So it was delayed and delayed and delayed to try to figure out how we're supposed to do this with the budget that we have, right? And it wasn't us. We're not a public low bid contractor, so it wasn't us, but we were seeing this happening. And we were like, there's a better way. Let's get these kids in school. Long story short, it ends up, Eddie, that these kids in this area that was not an affluent area of West Virginia anyway, in these areas, there are kids who never had a high school. 4 years it took to even get something started on this. You had kids who never had a high school. I had a kid here in this office that we were thinking about hiring that said, I went from my trailer park to trailers at school for 4 years. They never had a high school. They were in trailers the entire time. Never had a prom, never had a high school, never had a gym, never had a football field. And there was a better way. There was absolutely a better way. And that was what invigorated a group of us here at Pray to say, we have got to catch this up. We've got to have another way to get procurement on the ground, built up and used in a quicker time frame, in a more affordable time frame. And Ohio is doing it, and Pennsylvania is doing it, and Virginia is doing it. North Carolina's been doing it for 14 years or so. And so we internally started this grassroots legislative campaign to say, can we be better? Can we do better? Let's educate ourselves. And we're making some moves. I think it's going to work. I mean, knock on wood, we'll see. But I've talked too long about that subject, but you can see how passionate we are about that.
No, that's good. I'm glad you gave those examples too about Nicholas County High School or Nicholas County schools, and because I was going to go there anyways. But since you brought it up, also, do you want to go ahead and talk about Senate Bill 587 that Senator Glenn Jeffries, who also is a construction business owner, is introducing into legislation with, I believe, Mark's help?
Yes, actually. So Mark is our past president, and he has kind of made this one of his legacy projects. He's been doing this almost 50 years now. And so he's seen a lot of things. He's been 50 years here, right in Charleston, West Virginia. So he knows a lot of people. He's seen a lot of things, and he was one of the ones that were just devastated over, these happenings that we described there. Senator Glenn Jeffries is a constructor. He owns and operates a carpentry company in West Virginia who works very closely with Pray on many projects. We use their carpenters, we use their services, and he's a fantastic, hardworking man who has helped us, and he was perfectly positioned for us to go to and say, Glenn, let's try to do this. And so together, he and Mark and some very important other people in Charleston, some legislators, some other people from representative from the local AGC, CAWB, got together, some architects, some the school building authority, a lot of folks came to the table for a big round table, and they've been doing this for a little while, and said, let's try to look at these other bills and let's try to replicate these laws and let's see what happens. Um, it was met with a little bit of resistance. So it took a little bit of working out. And the resistance, I think, is, normal, natural questioning of, well, it's worked. It's the low bid method is tried and true. Why are we trying to change it? And to be clear here, Eddie, we are not trying to make low bid go away. It will, and we participate in it. It is a good method for many, many projects. I think even maybe like the heavy highways is probably more suited to that, where there's a lot of, commodity type activity that goes along with that, the paving and that type of thing. But these specialty builds, it really doesn't marry up to very well. And so the Senate bill, there are two versions of this bill going through the House committee and the Senate committees right now. And they are basically the same. They haven't morphed. The resistance was, the old guard type of low bid thing, or we're not disrupting any of that. We're just allowing certain types of projects at certain levels of expenditure be allowed to choose a different procurement method if the issuing entity would like to do that. And so what that will be is kind of a modified version of, if it passes, we're not sure if it's going to come out of committee in time to make this session. We're hopeful, but if it does not make this session, because the session ends pretty soon, if it doesn't make the session, we're hoping it will be taken back up next year. It's important, and I don't think it's meeting that much resistance to where it will never get done, but we've been pretty excited about the progress so far. But what it will look like is a modified design build type of arrangement. Some states call it best value design build or progressive design build. But basically the process that I described before, where it was this linear consecutive process and it comes out with plans and then it gets priced. Basically, it provides a team of collaborative people that contractually are bound to each other to collaborate. And so the contractor is at the table, the architect is at the table, the owner is at the table, the financing agency is at the table. The owner issuing agency would pick a design build team that would get together and collaboratively put these documents together as we go along, pricing all of the way, budgeting all of the way. And once you get pretty far along in the design, 35%, 45%, 55%, whatever, you can actually agree on that piece and start working. We can go out in the field. We can start breaking ground. We can start laying footings, that kind of stuff. As we are then continuing to hone the inside design, furnitures, fixtures, FF&E, those types of things. And so you can get an amazing schedule compression from working those things consecutively. And as you well know, if you can get us in and out, time is money. Schedule is everything in terms of affording the budget. And so that is the methodology that we hope legislatively will be allowed to be a choice for some of these projects that would marry up that way. And of course, it'll be bound by all of the, commerce laws, and, it won't be anything that is just a grandiose departure. It will simply be another choice to put a project into procurement and into fruition a little sooner and a little better suited to the deliverables that are desired.
Today. So it'll give people more options.
Yes.
Contract owners more options, more alternatives. Like you said, you're not trying to do away with low bid.
No.
Because you had mentioned yesterday that there is a misconception that the low bidder is always the best option. But you also said that sometimes the owner becomes a hostage in a low bid contract. So when does the lowest price matter? And when does it not matter?
So I think, and this, I'm getting into more of my opinion than published fact here, but I mean, just based on my experience, and use it in your personal life. Like take the example from your personal life. Like, what do you like to do? What do you like to perform? And I'm not talking about the big things of the heart, your mom and your family and, your religion. I'm not talking about the big things, but I'm talking about the things that you do in your daily life. I hike. I like coffee. I read books, right? Other people I like to bike. I don't go to Walmart and buy the cheapest bicycle and buy the off-brand coffee. I would if price was the only thing that mattered to me, but performance matters, right? And so I don't know, if you think about all of the things that you purchase in your life, you probably really only buy the cheapest one 10% of the time. 5% of the time, right? When it doesn't really matter. Maybe you're getting paper plates for an office party. Okay. Maybe that doesn't matter, right? So you buy the cheapest ones that you find at the store, right? So commodity type stuff where it really doesn't matter. You're going to consume them and it really doesn't matter. But if you're looking for features, if you're looking for benefit, if you're looking for results, you're probably not going to buy the cheapest one. You're going to buy the one that gives you the best value, that gives you the better performance, the better ability to attain revenue, right? Commercial buildings are built to put revenue on the books, right? So you want your bank teller line to have workflow that's super efficient. If the person can take care of 2 people in the car line while somebody else is taking care of 2 people behind you in the lobby, then that's 4 people that got throughput in the same amount of time, right? So workflow matters. So my point is, it matters when results matter, right, for you. And in the commercial arena, that's almost always, right? That's almost always, at least for what we do for a living here at Pray. And I would argue that it's almost always for many of the things that municipalities and cities and governments put into place, right? Think judicial centers. This was an example that struck me. So think about the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, an amazing feature of architecture and functionality, right? But really think about the design there. Sure, there were choices. There's design choices about bridges all across America, right? But at the end of the day, you just have to get that span. You have to get that span safely. And there may be 5 or 10 choices to do that with, right? And so you pick that, and then you pick the aesthetic features that go with that. That is probably an okay, unless you're really wanting the result of aesthetics. If you're really wanting the results of aesthetics, that's probably a design build type scenario. But if you're not, it's probably a low bid type of scenario, right? How can I safely and with all of the laws of engineering and architecture put the span across this water, right? So there's probably 10, 12 choices there. What about a jail with a judicial center, right? Hundreds and hundreds of choices about how that building is going to get used for the next 40 years, right? Hundreds of choices about how workflow moves through there, detainees move through there, folks ready for their day in court moves through there, workers move through there, safety, all of the law, all of the things that have to be attained, right? So it's not just a matter of physics and engineering. It's a matter of how do you want this building to perform and what those results have to be. When you're getting into that arena, it is begging for a design. It's begging for something a little bit more robust than the low bid method. So it's results versus price.
Today, so think of hard bid projects. as your original drawings and your original bids are starting points.
Yes.
But basically, and rarely do we ever see a job, whether it's even a highway job or a commercial building or a residential building, to finish at the original contract amount. There's always change orders. And what you've been describing and talking about are better alternatives to maximizing for the customer, them getting the best product at the best price, which when you start at the low bid price, you're going to end up at a higher price with all the change orders. Or if you just went with the design build, and you can talk about construction manager at risk, that also, you end up with the best product at the price you were going to end up with anyway, and sometimes maybe even lower.
Yes, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So one of the questions yesterday in the presentation was, how many times have you had a low bid job for a public entity? And again, I want to disclaim that Prey only does that about 5 to 10% of the time. We're almost predominantly a private negotiated contractor. Just the space that we occupy and like, but we do public low bids, and we've done several of them this year because there's been several projects that we felt like we wanted to be involved with for one reason or another. But the question yesterday in the audience was, how many times have you come out of a public low bid with 0 change orders? And immediately from across the room, Mark and myself just held up the big double goose eggs. We have never once had a public bid that came out of it without one single change order. Most of the time they're in the couple dozen, and that is not because we like them. Frankly, this is another secret to the industry. Contractors don't like change orders. I mean, and it's a misconception that we do. And we can get into why we don't. The main reason is time, is money. And we need to keep that schedule. We need to get into your project and get out of your project on time because we've got other revenue scheduled, right? And time in the market is important. We don't want change orders. We don't want minds changed. We don't want change orders. We don't want to be there longer. It's not advantageous to us. It doesn't pay. And so despite what the myth is out there, the myth is that low bid is best, and the myth is that contractors like change orders. That's not actually true. Now, when do contractors like change orders? In low bid model, when you're just trying to beat the guy, you're going to bid the lowest price. It may be the worst option for the client, but you're going to bid the lowest price because you've just got to get to the next level. You've just got to beat the guy so that you can get at the table. Then the first thing you're going to do is, if you really want to build this, then here's $400,000 worth of changes to the footings or whatever. That's going to happen if you really want to build this, right? So I think that's how we got the reputation of loving change orders, but it was a mechanism to get to play. More than anything else. And so the truth and the reality is this: when all of this stuff is known concurrently going through the projects, you don't have the change orders. We actually have, we've had many projects where the client's budget's really strict and we get to the end and we have 0 change orders on design build, 0, right? Because we have gotten there, right? And we know exactly what we're supposed to do. Most of the time we have a handful, 5 or 6, and they are 98% of the time savings that we've been able to attain once we start buying out the job. And those on a design build scenario, by the way, go right back to the owner, right? If we're able to save anything throughout the process, those savings go right back to the owner. And almost always, I've never actually seen maybe once or twice, I've seen a client say, yeah, lower my contract price and give me the money back, or don't charge me that and I'll do something else with it. Almost always the client says, oh, well, if I have an extra $5,000, let's do some extra landscaping. What about, let's put a fountain in, let's do something aesthetic, right? Let's do something more. And so almost always the client is able to use that money again for, and maybe it's an extra smart board in the room or some extra communication equipment, or we shift that to landscaping or audio visual, or maybe a piece of equipment or furniture that they wanted. And so again, you're in the trenches here. You're not just low bidding a piece of paper. You're in the trenches with the client saying, what is it that you need to deliver this, and let's see what we can do it for, together. So it is the irony. You're actually getting a much better value for your money, and a much better result for your money, which is and the communication of your budget up front is super important. You can know within, you can do a feasibility study. You can say, I want this building and I have, $2 million. And right from the beginning, it is, yeah, that's possible. Or we're probably going to have to go back to the drawing board on the needs, because it's just not possible, based on today's prices, which are actually kind of scary now with, the tariff situation. So, it's even more important now for you to understand your budget and your pricing right from the beginning. And once there's a mutual level of trust there, those conversations just become easy and fun and progressive. And that's what we're looking for, in the public sector too.
I believe everything that you just said goes back to one of the things you said at the beginning of the podcast, in that you're trying to deliver the best product for the customer to deliver their mission, and in finding ways to cut costs or shift savings into something else, like you said, a whiteboard, or some other technology, if it's a school or if it's a hospital, you're creating more value to that product for them to deliver even more their mission.
Right.
And I also think that, I was going to say this when you were talking about misconceptions that contractors like change orders, probably what's spurred that is the meme that floats around out there of the boat sitting in the harbor and the name of the boat is change order. But
yeah, that's right. The dinghy, right, is the original contract, and the yacht is the change order, right?
Change order.
And there's some truth in that in low bid, right? Like there's some truth into that, because and I think, again, you get back to some, more unscrupulous contractors, that may be in the residential market, where, come in and say that they can do something for a certain price, get a retainer, and then, and it was probably a wholly different procurement method. It was probably time and materials, or, a lump sum where the scope wasn't clear, where somebody maybe took advantage of somebody else. But here's the thing about today in commercial work and public works. If you have a contractor that is qualified, and that's the big Q, right? I mean, this whole thing, even the bill, is premised on a person is qualified, right? You can't have a contractor who maybe has dabbled in residential renovations, right? You can't have a contractor like that bidding on a school, right? That's their market. They're needed and necessary, but you can't bring Tonka toys to move earth, on a school, right? So the big Q is something that we've focused on in the bill, right? You have to meet the qualifications package, right? But if you have a qualified contractor who has a reputation, like, for example, Prey, we do 95% of our work with private customers. And that's even how it fits into the low bid model. So, for example, let's say that we decide to low bid on a judicial annex downtown.
Today,
we might win that. We might figure out how we can win that. We might figure out a hook in the plans, something nobody's going to see, something that we can bid low and then change order later, right? To be able to build the building. We may be able to win that. And let's say that we do a mediocre performance. We would never do that, but let's just say we do. Or we even a really bad performance and get fired, which is also very unusual in public works. The next time another bid comes out, which is probably that same day or the very next day, we can bid on it and win it. And we can keep doing that over and over again, and we can keep collecting the money, and there are no repercussions to that, right? Because you have to pick the lowest bidder, and there's a very low bar of qualifications to even be able to do that. In fact, many of the people who bid on the jobs aren't really qualified to do the jobs. They just know they can bid low and get the job, right? Um, and so um, you can't do that in the private sector, and you can't do that with qualifications based, right? If we did that, we would never work again in this town, right? If we were to take advantage of somebody by not performing or by fleecing, for dollars. And by the way, that's even very hard to do in the design build because you have comparators, you have benchmarks. We have so much data about what buildings should cost per square foot, depending on what you put in there. We have the healthcare sector. We have we have it down by sector. We have 40 years of data about what something should cost, right? And so do our competitors, right? And so when you're working in that arena, even if you were inclined to be a little bit dishonest, you can't, and you're not. And you can't work like that for 40 years in the private sector and behave like that. So there's very little downside to doing this model where everybody comes to the table and they put their heart and their mind and their trust and their checkbook on the table together. And you've got this team and everybody's energized for this product, right? We take pride in everything that we build. And it's still there. And sometimes we've renovated floors of towers of downtown Charleston for, tenants that move in and out that we've renovated 3 or 4 times before. It hurts our feelings to go in there and demo something we built 5 years ago, right? Because there's so much pride. And so when you have that and you have people at the table that are reputable, qualified, and itching to have those results with and for you, everybody wins. You get none of those issues, performance or otherwise, that you get with the other models. And again, I hope I'm not coming off saying that low bid stinks and we should all switch to this. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we're smart enough to right size both of those for the projects that it makes sense to do that for, and for the situations that are desirable for both of those situations. And like I said, we decide to low bid some projects too, because we think they're right for that. So especially things that are technical, like we low bid
Today.
Elevator modernizations. That is something that municipality, federal and state governments are required to do for public buildings, public housing, public buildings. You are required to have, certain fire codes and certain mechanical safety for these types of things. So those are ripe. It's like the Golden Gate Bridge example, right? Those are ripe for low bid, right? Because there are mechanical solutions, and the result is simply safe and working, right? Those are right for those kinds of things, and we will continue to do that. And I'm assuming those things will continue to be publicly procured through the low bid method forever, right? Because it makes sense. Other things, not so much, and we need another option.
Yeah, low bid is not a one size fits all model for all contracts, and those are great examples. The elevators. Whereas a school or a hospital that has thousands of different working parts to it. It's not so cookie cutter like that.
No, we have a huge sector that's our healthcare sector now. One that we are in love with. It is such important, heady work. We had to learn a lot. We went back to school on a lot of those things. There are a lot of modern, thinking about how to put an MRI machine in, or how, renovate a building that can house that much weight and all of the attributes, a cancer vault, containing radiation, that kind of real heady work. I don't know anybody who has heard anything about it or knows anything about it that would ever want to go into that scenario with a low bid model. I mean, why would you ever want to go into that scenario with a low bid model? You absolutely would want to go into that scenario with as much room for participation, qualified planning that you possibly could. Fantastic resumes of people at the table figuring the problem out together. I just think it would, it's crazy and silly and maybe even dangerous to go into something like that in a low bid scenario, which is likely how the private sector morphed into a better delivery method way before the public sector has caught up to that. I'd like to think that that's how we got here. With somebody saying, wait, there has to be a better way to this. This is not working at all. And so I'd like to think that that's how that happened. And that's the space where we live in. Like I said, we do 90+% of our work in that space. That requires a little more coordination, a little more advanced planning for those items that are life-giving and just super important to to humankind, just making, not only making life better, but making health better and uh making life safer for people to exist in. That's all about infrastructure. I mean, construction hits every industry there is. There is an element of design and usefulness in almost everything that you do, including just your morning routine, getting up and getting out the door.
Mom. Tina, you've given us a lot of great information today, and you've made my job as a podcast host really easy with all that you've talked about. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share before we sign off for today?
We always end and begin our praying with gratitude. And we are just blessed to live in this beautiful mountain state, and for people to trust us with what it is that they desire to do most for themselves. And I extend that to the group of people who got together and said, you know what, let's try to do this in the public sector too. And the group of people who in their heart felt the same way we did about, the flood. And I use that just as an example, because that was kind of the catalyst here at Pray for us to go here. But these other people, had other reasons to come to the table and say, let's try to change something. I mean, I think I had a slide up yesterday. I think I included it where it said, if you want change, but you're not actually willing to do anything about it, well, what you actually really just want is magic. Okay. And there's a group of people who said, no, we really want this, and we really want to find the resistance out there. And there was resistance on a number of different levels. And we have a bill now that is in committee. And I don't know if it'll pass. I don't know if it'll get this legislative session or the next one. But what we already have here at Pray is just a bunch of gratitude about folks who are like-minded, who care about West Virginia and the people in it, and the surrounding states. We work in the surrounding states too. And I'll just say community, our community of building, that we're willing to get together and put some of their aversions or some of their viewpoints aside and listen to some other ones and then merge all of those together. So I thanked the institution yesterday who put on a brief seminar, and I'll thank you, Eddie, for allowing a venue to have these really positive, progressive thoughts. And we're lucky at Pray that people allow us to talk as much as we do. So I appreciate you.
Oh, you're certainly welcome. And I appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast and to discuss this. And like you said before, this is your passion. You're passionate about these things, and it really shows in your presentation yesterday and the way you talked about it today. So thank you for what you've done for the community and what you are trying to do in legislation also.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll be around for the next 40 years. So
there we go. Well, this wraps up another episode of Construct-ive Conversations. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel or our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For now, this is Eddie Thompson. So long.